I'm Jodie Hay, and together with my husband Colin, we milk 400 cows, mainly Friesians with some crossbreds and Jerseys at Haybrook Farms, a wee up near Kahuna, northern Victoria. To grow our dairy business, we've invested in a cattle shelter, feed pad and additional land. Just a brief history. Colin's parents started dairying on the farm in 1967. We farmed together with them until we took over in 1999. Since then, we have progressively expanded the farm by buying neighbouring properties. We've developed its irrigation systems to grow more pasture and crops and developed a cow feeding infrastructure to increase our cow production. We now run a mixed enterprise business with dairying being the primary business, whilst also incorporating cropping and beef with our son Tom. Our daughter Emily lives on the property with her partner Lockie, and they currently work off farm but have a keen interest in the farm and help out when needed. In 2000, we built a basic feed pad, which was incorporated into our dairy yard. We expanded the concrete dairy holding yard, incorporating 2 rows of concrete troughs, forming a feed pad that cows could eat a mixed ration before and after milking. Silage and hay was fed out using a silage cart. Then in 2008, we invested in a mixer wagon and began preparing and feeding more complex mixed rations with the help of a nutritionist, which included silages, hay, grain, minerals and canola meal. In 2013, we replaced the original 14-unit swing-over herringbone dairy with a second-hand 50-unit rotary and increased our per-cow production of 9,500 litres. This enabled us to increase our herd from 200 cows to 400 cows and increase the per-cow production to 9,500 litres. This system worked well until we had a very wet winter and spring in 2016. Our grazing paddocks and laneways were severely damaged by the cows, and we were really struggling to provide the cows with a dry, comfortable loafing area using the bark chips in a sacrifice paddock close to the dairy. So we started to consider investing in a facility that would enable us to loaf the cows comfortably in between milkings and during periods of wet weather and on really hot days, while sustaining their feed intakes and milk production and retain the flexibility to continue grazing cows when good quality pasture was available, while not trying to tie up so much money that we would be able to finance other farm developments when needed. We spent time researching farms in Victoria and South Australia which had already invested in housing facilities. We opted for a cattle shelter with a solid pitched roof and a composted bedded pack to be located within close proximity to the existing feed pad and the dairy holding yard. We built the shelter in 2017 at a total cost of $300,000. It's a very simple, low-cost structure, 72 metres long and 40 metres wide, providing an area of 7.2 metres squared per cow. It has a north-south orientation. It's an ironclad roof, pitched at 22 degrees with a capped central ridged vent. There's 4 rows of 8 steel posts, 5 metre clearance on each side with no eave. The prefab relocatable concrete panels along 3 sides of the shelter, while the 4th side facing the feed pad is open. We use a compost bedded pack under the shed. There's a 100 kilowatt roof solar panel system, and we have an evacuated tube solar hot water system to reduce energy costs. We generally use the shelter during the daytime. We use a nearby sacrifice paddock to loaf our cows overnight, except when it's too wet. This keeps excessive pressure off the shelter's compact bedded pack and enables us to cope with the stocking density of 1 cow per 7.2 metres squared. In wet weather, the shelter helps us protect our pastures and laneways from pugging damage. But in hot weather, that's when it really comes into its own, helping to keep our cows and our staff comfortable and healthy. The cows love the shade, and on a 40-degree day, our hardest job is getting them to leave the shelter and venture out into the sun to come to the dairy. When it comes to the bedding, we're in the business of turning over the compost bedded pack at every milking, so twice per day, and keeping it nice and dry and comfortable for the cows to loaf on. There are no shortcuts when it comes to the bedding. If you get that wrong, it can get really ugly. Maintaining a clean, dry bedding is essential for cow health. Ploughing the bedding only takes about 20 minutes using our harrow. When the bedded pack gets too moist and needs to be topped up with dry material, we prefer to use straw. We really don't have to do this very often, as we rarely use the shelter in winter unless the weather is inclement. When we're able to graze, we graze. For us, flexibility is king, and the cattle shelter integrated with 2 nearby PMR feeding facilities, the loafing barn and the earthen feed pad and the concrete feed pad in the dairy holding yard provide the greater flexibility we were seeking. We don't feel compelled to use the shelter at all times of the year, only when it will help us protect pastures and laneways from damage during wet weather and reduce heat stress during hot weather for the cows. We can continue to graze cows during the day when conditions are suitable, but if they're not, we can still keep cows fully fed. Now let's talk about the daily routine. Before each milking, cows walk up the centre of the holding yard and can eat a mixed ration from the troughs on either side. During milking, on the rotary platform, each cow receives a small quantity of grain mix in the bale, around about 2 kilos. After milking, as each cow exits the parlour down the side of the holding yard, she has further opportunity to eat the mixed ration remaining on the concrete troughs. As the backing gate progressively moves up the middle of the yard behind the cows yet to be milked, more feeding space becomes available for those cows that have already been milked and exited the parlour. On hot days, the sprinklers in the holding yard are left on during milking and for up to 2 hours after milking finishes. Cows are left to decide when they leave the yard. After AM milking, cows may be directed to a designated day paddock and then left to decide when they make their way up to the cattle shelter and the adjacent feed pad. After the PM milking, cows may walk to the designated night paddock or be directed into the adjacent sacrifice paddock, from where they may walk back to the holding yard to feed overnight. The holding yard is flood washed after each milking using recycled effluent from the 2-dam effluent system. The earthen feed pad doesn't have a very well compacted surface, so when in very wet weather, it becomes too muddy for the tractors and cows. This isn't a major drama. We just tape off the open side of the shelter to prevent cows using it, and they use the concrete feed pad yard instead, which is an all-weather feeding facility. Again, it's a very flexible system. If we had our time again, we would spend the extra money for a clear span structure so that we wouldn't have to worry about bruising the posts when scarifying. We would also make it bigger and allow about 14 square metres per cow. To minimise heavy rain from the south and the north from wetting the bedding pack, we would also add ends to the shelter from the top of the pillars to the centre ridge vent. Ideally, installing retractable blinds between the third side pillars nearest to the south-southwest corner of the shelter and have an eave extending at least 1 metre from each side of the shelter. These are things that we could readily retrofit into the shelter in the coming years. We're also very happy with the airflow in the facility, so don't see any need to install any fans at this stage. A complete concrete laneway from the dairy to the loafing barn would also be ideal in wet weather. For dairy farmers in this region committed to a grazing system who may be looking to invest in a facility of moderate cost to increase their flexibility and cow comfort under wet and hot conditions, a cattle shelter like ours, integrated with a feed pad, may be well worth considering. Our investment in this cattle shelter 6 years ago has already paid off, so we are free now to invest in other farm developments to keep our dairy business moving forward.